sustain those pieces. So that's the work we're going to do today. We're going to base it off the work that we've already done on our poster and on developing the toolkit, and then we're going to take out this element that has become so critical in the work of evolving kind of healthcare systems. And so there's going to be some group work that you guys do. You split up into two teams and brainstorm a few pieces. So you're going to do that using some of that paper, and you've got tape to help stick on the wall, and you've got pins to stick those on the wall, and then we'll come back and we will discuss those.
Are we allowed to use pins on the walls?
I think so.
That
we
one,
can use
that one,
I think that one looks a little different. Otherwise you can use the tissue.
It's light.
Yeah. Okay, so camera action. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's lovely to see you all this morning. So today we've got a couple of hours at least to do some work around building and expanding the blocks on the work that we've been doing around our Aging in Place project. How did you guys find the nursing symposium?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was really sort of inspirational.
Mhm.
I feel like every year it gives me a little, like, I don't know, inspiration that I need. And it was fun to do the poster presentation as well, which I had never done before.
Good.
So.
Good.
I enjoyed it, inspirational. We got a lot of good feedback on our poster board. Educational. I learned a lot of new information from listening to the presentations. Some of them were exceptional, actually.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Which ones did you find exceptional?
The Dr. Morris from BS, the
He was
Board of
great.
Registered Nursing. Also Maxine Rand, I found her to be extremely exceptional, her speech. Very inspirational person, very dynamic, engaging, and magnetic.
Excellent.
I enjoyed it.
Catherine.
That was so. I've been to all three, and so this one I agree that it was very inspiring. I just felt the energy that all the presenters were giving was wonderful. It just really got the audience engaged, and like you can go out there and do whatever you want. So I liked that, and then like Liz, that was the first. I mean, in undergraduate, like we did little poster, but just for our class. So this was like the first time that I've ever been a part of a poster presentation for not my fellow students. So that was a little nerve-wracking, but I felt like after I did my spiel like one time, and I got it, and then so it was a really good experience.
What kinds of things do people ask you or want clarification about?
So they wanted to know where we were going to be getting the people, the mentors from, and then they wanted to know had we started yet, and so those were the main questions, but a lot of it was like, wow, this seems like such a great idea, and that was majority of the feedback. Those were like the two main questions that that I really received, and then everybody else just was kind of, we explained it, and then they were looking at the poster, and they were just like, it sounds like it's going to be great.
Great,
So,
that's really encouraging.
Yeah.
I found myself giving a presentation on it. When people would ask a question, I would start presenting it. And then they were like, well, I don't have a lot of time.
That's good, you're enthusiastic. Yeah, you showed your passion for your project.
Exactly.
Yes. You know, I think from the standpoint of your work as, especially for the three of you, as nurse educators, what are your comments and reflections around doing a poster presentation, for example, as a medium of engaging others and really sharing information?
So do you mean like having the students partake in developing it, or using it more as like a tool within the classroom that the instructors already made and using it then as to share?
So if you look at conference attendances, for example, so you can be in a conference and you could be a podium presenter, and you're telling that story. And you may have an allotted 1 hour of time to develop a theme, to walk through all of the ramifications of whatever it is the topic is. Now, for a poster presentation, that's very different. You know, as you just commented, somebody's going to come up to you and they basically have an attention span of maybe 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. So from a nurse educator standpoint, you've got this big, huge story that you're going to be telling. What sort of strategies did you think of immediately to bring to hand about how do I share the story in 2 or 3 minutes?
I think the diagrams and the pictures are huge, because it just brings the big point down into like a simple form that you can just kind of look at it and get a good understanding by just looking at the diagrams and pictures. So I felt like that. You want less words, because then that's when people kind of get lost if they have to do a lot of reading. So that was, so like the diagrams that we chose, I feel like a lot can be said just looking at those alone. I feel like you get a good idea.
For me, the diagrams and pictures are great because as a teacher, most people are visual learners, and they're going to hone in on the color, and they're going to read a few of the pages, and then I fill in the rest with narrative pedagogy, and that's how it would work for me. Similar to a PowerPoint, only less words, and more pictures, and then more explanation, and I would explain the things they're interested in, because they only have a few minutes. They're not gonna, I'm not gonna be able to, in that amount of time, explain the entire project. That would take, as it's taken us a whole quarter, you know, to develop, so.
I also think you can't really predict the agenda of who's visiting your poster, and so it's kind of good to do something representative with the idea that who comes up can take whatever agenda they're coming up to you with and focus in on the area that they're wanting to ask about, and especially with a project that has multiple dimensions, because there's the mentors, the older adults, the students, so you could be coming at it just like we are from a care transition standpoint, an educator standpoint, and it gives the opportunity, you're not focusing the poster so that someone can choose the area of interest and ask about that specific piece, and you can address that. You broaden your audience.
Good points. Liz, from a care transition standpoint, how easy was it, or how effective is this medium in telling a care transition story, do you think?
Well, I think it's similar in a way to the I mean, there's so much education involved in care transitions that I sort of did the overall, you know, what we're doing, and then kind of tailored my follow-up based on what the person I was talking to was interested in or most kind of relevant. Like one lady was the CEO of the hospital, so she was asking about sort of financing, and another was a student and was asking about whether this is part of the curriculum, whether it'll be part of the curriculum in the summer. So I think in a similar way, I just kind of did the overview and then tailored it to what the person, kind of like what the person what their health needs would be. I tailored it to like what their interest was.
And so as I listen to you all, one of the things that strikes me is that despite the fact that you're in different tracks and concentrations, so you as educators, you in care transitions, the very common theme there is education, engagement, and reaching out to different populations, all of which require very similar strategies, right? But sometimes perhaps nuanced a little differently or targeted a little differently. And I think that's part of the beauty of what we do, is recognizing where those nuances should be and where those strategies, if you like, have to be differentiated in order to engage effectively with an audience. And so when you think about that and you think about some of the current discourse around how do we work effectively with patients, how do we work effectively with stakeholders, there's a lot of this that has to do with communication, a lot of it that has to do with learning. And it's been interesting again hearing you guys say, what I said to an individual who talked to me about the poster really was nuanced to meet or to fill the gap that they were expressing. And so what do we usually call that? We call that a learning needs assessment. Very, very similar. That person's come to you, they have some idea about X, Y, and Z. They're not necessarily going to want to know that piece. They're going to want to know about the gap. And so understanding that piece, again, is really critical, because often that's the piece that we don't do quite as well as we should do, assessing that learning need so that we can tailor whatever we're doing from an education standpoint, patient care journey standpoint, to meet the needs of whoever stakeholder is.
Yeah, that being said, don't you think that's what nurses do best in the
Yes.
shortest and most efficient amount of time?
Yes.
So I think it just speaks to nursing and what nurses offer in those areas is we've become very, very good at meeting someone for the first time and in a very short period of time trying to feel out what the gap is
Right.
and what needs to
Right.
be filled.
Yeah.
So I feel like it translates very well from basic professional nursing to advanced practice nursing.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I think it's a work that we're having to do more and more. So for example, as I speak with a home health nurse who is feeling frustrated because they're working with a patient, have been working with a patient for maybe about a month or so around their diabetes. And the frustration is, quote unquote, the patient is not making progress. And so I might sit and I might talk with this nurse and I might say, so what do you think the barriers are? And they might say, well, the patient just doesn't want to do it. We all find ourselves in this space where we just don't want to do it. But often, there's an underlying reason why we don't want to do it. And that reason might not always be very explicit, even to me, who doesn't want to do whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so having that skill that helps you hone in on what is important, and sometimes having to help that person to understand what is important, it's in and of itself a huge part of what we do. And we do it so well that often we don't think concretely about it. But there are also times when we do it so well that we forget to take perhaps a step back and actually listen and hear for what that person is actually needing before we kind of step into that space, because we're very good at stepping into that space.
I think some of the challenge is you have to back off solving a big problem.
Yes.
You have to just, you in the back of your mind, that there's that bigger goal, but you have to kind of get off of that, because the longer you harp on that, the more you're missing the boat on ever getting there.
Yes.
And that's hard because you want to fix it.
We're good fixers.
Yeah. So I think that's the challenge is realizing you can't fix it until you back off of it, which is challenging.
Or even like in conflict resolution, when you break something down into its simplest form
Right.
and work with a small piece at a time.
Can I ask a
One
really
barrier.
basic question?
Absolutely. It's April Fool's Day, so tell us. Go ahead.
Does everyone know how to take credit for this in their resume?
No.
No.
Because you should add it to your CV immediately while it's fresh in your mind, and you should have start a section of your resume or your CV of presentations, poster or speaker presentations. So anything you do as far as presenting a lecture or a poster, you should just start now with a section of your CV that addresses that and the dates, because you'll forget. And you'll be like, when did I do that? And you'll be looking through your calendar. But I think if you put it in there now, you'll have it, and it looks really, it looks far more impressive. And then when you put it in there, you're like, wow, that looks really impressive. And I think it starts to
Yes.
make you feel like you're owning that role, and I'm a presenter, and this is something I do, and I have a section here that says that I do this, and I think it's kind of a nice step.
Well, it is. Very much so. And the other piece is that you start to evidence to yourself about your scholarly work. And again, that's something that we don't always think about necessarily day in, day out as we're doing all of our stuff. The scholarship of all the work that we do, scholarship in teaching, scholarship in research, etc. So yes, thank you for reminding us. So she's your source person. You need to email her tonight and say, what's the form?
I can show you how I do it on mine.
Right.
There's multiple ways to do
Okay.
it, but depending on what the goal of
Yeah.
your document is, and you can look online, there's lots of examples, but I mean, I can show you what I've done, but everyone's background's a little different, so
Yes.
what categories you use is different, but that's just what I've found
Yeah.
helpful, because I often don't recognize at the moment
Right.
the value of it.
Yes.
And so if I put it in there right away and I recognize that this is either a publication or a presentation or whatever it is, if I get it on there right away, and then it starts to add up.
Right.
Like before you know it, you've got 2, and then
Yeah.
you've got 3, and then you've got 2 sections, because you've got to separate your papers from your, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And it really builds your confidence,
It
and
does.
it's a nice, I think it's a nice rite of passage.
Yes. Right, so passage. Amy, can I ask you to fix that
Oh,
thing
of
that's
course.
falling over?
Yeah,
It's
of course.
driving me a little.
Yeah, hand me some tape and
Okay.
I'll do some first aid.
So this leads us really nicely into our focus for today, which is looking at how do we hardwire learning? How do we hardwire concepts? Those are really critical parts of the work that you do as educators, because when you educate, you have an end goal and you have some specific objectives. And you educate because invariably you're looking for perhaps some degree of behavior change. Something is supposed to be changing because of that process of learning. And that's also very relevant to care transitions. Okay. So as we do our work, in the formal academic setting with students, for example, or with patients, or with our colleagues, etc., how do we make sure that the learning that takes place is actually sustained? So those are some of the areas that I want us to think about for our session today. How do we effectively hardwire concepts, and why is this even necessary to discuss and talk about? Much is changing in healthcare, and we know we're needing organizations to change and evolve. We're anticipating that patients are also going to have to change and evolve along with all the evolutions that is taking place. So that's going to be part of our focus for today. Good. So let's start off looking at, let's see if this will work. It did. So let's ground this in a little discussion around some of the contemporary issues in care transitions management and education. So our objectives today, we really want to look at you being able to explain the concepts, some of the concepts around population health, and to recognize the need for a population health approach to healthcare education, delivery, and policy. And to discuss the integration of the 4 pillars of population health. So those will be some of the objectives that we're working to. So let's go back to our aging in place mod. So one of the things that we've said is that this model has to be person-centered. It's also got to be evidence-based, and it's outcomes-oriented. We're looking at 4 main domains: home safety assessments, technology optimization, access to medical care, and psychosocial resourcing. And we've also said that part of the principle of this design is going to be how we actually co-produce the care delivery model with the actual users. So when you think about co-producing or collaborating, what are some of the principles and issues that you think should come to mind when you think of working with others?
That people work well together or are able to kind of gain something out of it, each side.
Are you referring to the people
So,
or
it-
the different domains?
so the people, in any
People.
situation where you're engaging with others on a common goal, what are some of the things that you take into consideration or you really should have at the back of your mind?
Well, you should want to understand people's strengths and weaknesses, and then
Amy, can you capture these for us?
Of course.
Thank you.
Should I just turn the
Yeah,
paper?
turn this over.
and really play on the people's strengths and determine who will be good at what, and then it's more of then that's when you get the collaboration, because then people are feeling confident because they know what they're good at, and you just play on that, and that will allow for good progress, I think, on whatever you're trying to accomplish.
There's give and take. Each person is coming from a different culture, perhaps.
Right.
Different education level.
Yes, and, or different perspectives
Mhm.
based on the work they've done in the past. And they're gonna have different perspectives based on the common goal. So deciding on the goal and kind of having respect for each other and our differences and finding some common ground. Those are the things that come to mind when I think of teamwork and collaboration.
Maybe also finding out what the goals of the person you're working with are, like what's important to them.
And Liz, why do you think that's particularly important? Finding out the goals of.
Well, I think when we've talked about it before, it's like you can educate on, checking your blood sugar, but if someone doesn't have a glucometer, there's really no point. Like you have to kind of figure out what people want or what people kind of are willing to buy into, like checking their. That's not a great example, but it's really useless if you kind of go on and on about something that person is not going to buy into at all. You have to figure out what they will buy into and kind of take baby steps to get to the overall goal.
That's what provides their motivation.
Yeah.
And that makes
Good
me think
points.
of meeting them where they're at.
Right, yeah.
Versus coming in there with a whole list of a to-do list and overwhelming them.
Right.
So, a great concept that you just pulled out for us, Kathy, is meeting people where they're at. And how do we know, how do we do that? How do you get a feel for where that person is at?
Conversation.
An assessment.
Yeah, the
Okay.
learning needs assessment.
So we can do a learning needs assessment, conversations.
Develop trust.
Because trust helps to foster open
Open dialogue.
dialogue. Okay, good.
And you're not going to have an impact on somebody if they don't trust you. You're just somebody coming and selling something, so,
Right.
based on experience.
And is it necessarily about our goals for the patient or whoever the stakeholder is, or is it about their goals? What do you think? Okay. And why do you say that, Catherine?
I think that coming into a situation, both parties are going to have some type of goal that they want to reach. And so then that's how you make it a beneficial relationship on both sides. Even though it may seem one person may be gaining more, that's okay, but in the big picture, by having people work together, that just kind of is what happens. Both people will get something out of it some way or another.
So is this almost kind of new way of working, do you think that that's significantly different perhaps from how we've engaged with patients in the past?
Yes, based on my experience in
Mhm.
community health courses and in community health, since I work in community health. Our project is much more collaborative than anything I've done in the past.
And so when you talk about it's much more collaborative, what are the pieces that actually evidence that collaboration?
The learning needs assessment,
Mhm.
number one, instead of going in with my goal only.
Right.
What is their goal? Looking at it from their perspective much more than I have in the past. Which carries much more weight. Looking at them as a partner and even a mentor versus the, say, clinician and client, me having the upper hand. This is much more dynamic, collaborative. Each of us has an equal role, let's say. In the past, I had the stronger role. This is a different way of looking at community health, and I believe will be much more successful than the old way.
So would you say that some of the work that you've done around this has already started to impact your practices in any way?
I can't talk right now.
All right.
I'll comment in a little bit.
You'll comment in a bit. Liz?
I think so. I think it's influenced how I interact with the residents, which are the patients where I work. I think I'm more likely to consider their perspective more, and where I work, most of them are aging in place in a way. So I think I'm starting to see things kind of through this model a little bit more, I'd say. Yeah.
Good. Amy, are you able to talk now?
I think so. I'll try. Sorry. I would say I'm maybe see people more for what they're bringing, and them as a whole person, rather than their particular situation right now. So I think I've had an increased appreciation for all of the life they've had before I've ever met them, and that they've been existing in the world without me for a long time. And I'm the one that's new on the scene. So that's my perspective.
Right.
I'm kind of showing up to offer something, and I think I have something to offer, but the bulk of the iceberg is under the water, out of my sight, and somehow they've managed without me for all this time. So that's my perspective.
Good. Excellent. Okay, good. So we've picked up, looks like a couple of pages of themes and comments, and we'll get back to this. So let's move this on. So when we talk about population health, now what comes to mind for you when you hear population health? I mean, it's now a good buzzword. We're all using it. I suspect we're all using it from a slightly different perspective and standpoint, depending on what patient population we're working with. But what do you think this move now towards population health is about?
I think it shows an appreciation for the interconnectedness of people, communities, and the globalization of people in general. People travel a lot. People are connected in ways that they were not connected before. for both good and bad. And I think looking at population health appreciates that all of those many interconnections, and both for the problems that causes as well as the solutions that opens up. So I think it reflects the way the world has changed.
Right.
And I think it takes into consideration things that we didn't take into consideration as much before, like the health determinants. Like, so you're not just looking at people who have congestive heart failure. It's, well, they have heart failure, but maybe they're their socioeconomic status or their education level, like you're considering how all of those things kind of interact as well.
Right.
So it's not just the diabetic, it's, the person and this group of people who share these similar characteristics. It's not just the disease process.
Right. So that's a key point that you just made too. So is a group that has similar characteristics, right? Okay. Good. Catherine?
Smaller than a community, a group that has similar, because a community can be a very large radius. This population is within that community that has maybe a common goal and certain health determinants because of, once again, like she said, socioeconomic status, education, age. So it's a more, for me, it's a more narrow focus. And it's helpful. It's actually kind of humbled my opinion, not opinion, but it's humbled me to consider working in a certain population as looking at what their needs are versus what I need to teach them, what I need to do for them. So that's all that comes to mind right now.
Good thoughts? Catherine, thoughts?
I feel like everyone kind of touched on what I was thinking. I think the big thing that Liz said that stood out to me that I think is most important is not treating the disease, but treating the people. And I think that's, to me, I feel like that's most important. Having a good understanding of the person and looking at them as a whole, this whole holistic care versus very focused.
And I think that's the key part, because treating diseases hasn't really gotten us where we wanted to be.
Right.
Because if you ignore all of those other holistic things, you don't actually come up with any outcome that's sustainable.
Yeah.
Person-centered care.
Right. So yes, that takes us right back to person-centeredness. It also takes us, I think, to the point where we look at outcomes, right? Because we're saying we don't want to just treat the disease. We want to make sure that we're being holistic. And so it's important to have line of sight to how do you know that the work that you're doing is not just focused on the disease, but it's really actually holistic. And sometimes we don't necessarily think just about that piece when we're engaging, because you've gone out to visit a patient. The primary reason why you're out there is to help them gain better control of their diabetes, and so that's a big part of your focus in that interaction. And so consciously going to that place that says Mrs. Smith is not just a diabetic, she is a mother of 3 children and a husband, and she has a job, and she has this, that, and the other, and all these pieces influence and impact the way that her diabetes is managed. It's critically important, yes, to do that. So how do we, it's always interesting to me, how do we identify populations? So let's just say, hands up everyone in this room who's African American. Hands up everyone who's had an ice cream in the last month. So we have a population of 2 ice cream eaters right there. Hands up, everyone who bought a pair of shoes that was 50% reduced over the last 6 months.
Double hands.
Double hands, I did it twice. The point being that when you think about populations, there's a certain fluidity, right?
It's kind of arbitrary.
It's kind of arbitrary.
Depending on what your focus is.
Exactly. And that's really important because when it comes to the shoes, there are people who have multiple personalities, right? When it comes to being African American, I'm one. I'm a population of one. And it's important to understand also that when you talk about population health, and you're looking at how you target, you do the care redesign and you target interventions, etc., that you have to remember that the people within the population do not neatly fit into one box.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so your comment, Amy, about it's a big world out there and people travel, they move around. It's the same thing that happens to us with population health. And so if you're doing population health interventions, for example, for a population of diabetics, participants in that population might also be in that population of heart failure or renal failure.